My name is Riley Nash. I've said that name out loud so many times in my life that it should feel permanent, solid, like something that belongs entirely to me. But lately, even my own name feels borrowed, like I'm carrying it for someone else who hasn't finished speaking yet. I grew up in Denver, normal city, normal streets, normal schools. My parents are still alive, still married. No dark family secrets, no missing relatives, no tragic childhood that would explain why my mind feels crowded with things that don't belong there. That's the part that bothers me the most. Nothing about my life explains what's been happening. I became an investigative journalist because unanswered questions make my skin itch. I don't mean that figuratively. When something doesn't make sense, I feel it in my body. Tight shoulders, jaw locked, that low-level anxiety that doesn't let you sleep until the puzzle clicks. That personality flaw eventually turned into a small YouTube channel. I focused on unsolved cases, forgotten fires, towns that quietly erased uncomfortable histories. Nothing flashy, no jump scares, just facts, documents, timelines, and my voice. It wasn't about fame, it was about closure, for me and hopefully for the people listening. Then one night, everything shifted. I had just uploaded a video about a missing hiker when I noticed a new comment, short, plain, no username I recognized. Look up the St. Alden church fire in Dry Creek, Colorado. Nobody tells the truth about it. Normally, comments like that go straight into the mental trash bin. Every case attracts someone who wants attention, someone who wants to feel important, someone who thinks they know something everyone else doesn't. I almost scrolled past it. Then I saw the date, March 14th, 1993. My stomach tightened so fast, it felt like someone had grabbed my insides and twisted. That date wasn't unfamiliar. It had been following me my entire life. I'd written it in notebooks without realizing it, carved it into desks during boring classes. Once I even scratched it on the side of a cardboard box while packing up an apartment, only noticing after the fact. I always laughed it off. Everyone has habits they don't remember starting. But seeing it tied to a real event made my chest feel heavy. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself I was reaching. I told myself to Google it anyway. The search results were dry, old articles, small town coverage, one tragic night, neatly summarized. A church outside Dry Creek burned during an evening youth meeting. 6 teenagers and 1 young woman died. Officials blamed a troubled girl named Leanne Porter, who allegedly started the fire and died in a car accident later that same night while fleeing. Case closed. The town mourned. The town moved on. I should have closed the tab. Instead, I kept reading. And that's when the wrongness crept in. Not the tragedy. I've read about worse. Not the death toll. I've covered cases with higher numbers. It was the details. I knew the layout of the church before I ever saw a diagram. I knew the kitchen was narrow and smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and burnt coffee. I knew the back hallway floor creaked near the emergency exit. I knew the sound the door made when it shut too hard. These weren't facts I was learning. They were memories. And they didn't feel like research. They felt like remembering a place I used to belong to. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was scared, because I felt grief. Real grief. Heavy and personal and sharp around the edges. And I had no idea who it belonged I tried to ignore the feeling that followed me after that night. I really did. I went back to editing videos, answered emails, pretended the heaviness in my chest was just another unresolved case sticking to my ribs. But the name Dry Creek kept resurfacing in my thoughts, like something tapping from the inside of my skull. I started noticing other things, too. Certain smells made my stomach flip. Smoke from a grill, old wood soaked in heat, even the faint burn of a candle left on too long. My throat would tighten, my breathing would shallow, and I'd have to step away before panic crept in. That had never happened to me before. I told myself I was letting a story get under my skin. It happens in this line of work. You immerse yourself in tragedy long enough, and it starts to bleed into you. But this felt personal. This felt personal. A week after reading about the fire, I packed my car and drove south. No announcement, no dramatic plan. I told myself I was just gathering footage, context shots, atmosphere, the kind of background material that helps a case feel real to viewers. The truth was simpler. Something was pulling me there. Dry Creek barely qualifies as a dot on a map. If you blink at the wrong time, you miss the turnoff. The road narrows as you approach, the scenery flattening into dry grass and clusters of pine that feel too sparse to offer comfort. There's a quiet to places like that. Not peaceful, not calm, just empty, like sound itself doesn't want to linger. The diner sat on the corner of the main road, windows fogged from grease and age. The hardware store looked like it hadn't updated its sign since the 90s. And standing a little apart from everything else was the church. Not the original one. That one had been rebuilt. Twice. Fresh paint, new roof, clean lines. The kind of place that tries very hard to look healed. But up the hill, beyond a rusted fence and a patch of dead grass, sat the foundation of the original St. Alden's. They never cleared it. I parked my car and sat there longer than I meant to. The engine ticked as it cooled. The air outside looked thick, like heat without warmth. My hands stayed on the steering wheel even after I turned the car off. I didn't want to get out. Not because I was afraid of ghosts or curses or anything dramatic. Because stepping out felt like admitting I belonged there. When I finally did, the sensation hit me all at once. Familiarity. Not recognition, not curiosity, belonging. My chest tightened as if I'd walked into a room full of people who knew me very well, even if I didn't recognize their faces anymore. My legs carried me uphill without much input from my brain. Each step felt rehearsed, like muscle memory, finally given permission to act. The ruins weren't much to look at, just concrete outlines, broken walls, charred beams half swallowed by dirt and weeds. But as soon as I crossed into the main room, my breathing changed. It burned. Not pain exactly, pressure, like smoke filling a space that wasn't meant to hold it anymore. I lifted my recorder out of habit and spoke a few notes. Time, date, location. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. When I listened back later, there was a faint crackle under my words. At the time, I told myself it was wind. Then I heard footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, close enough that I felt the vibration before I fully registered the sound. I turned. The man standing behind me looked like he'd stepped out of an old photograph. Tall, lean, late 60s maybe. His coat hung loose on his frame, the fabric worn thin at the elbows.
His eyes were sunken, sharp, watching me in a way that felt more evaluative than curious. "Looking for something?" he asked. His voice was calm, too calm. I introduced myself, told him I was researching the fire. Something flickered across his face, recognition maybe, or calculation. "I'm Pastor Eldridge," he said. "I used to preach here." The name landed heavy. I had read it dozens of times already. The heroic pastor, the man who pulled 2 kids from the burning building, the one the town still spoke of in careful, reverent tones. He offered to talk. We sat at a picnic bench near the ruins. The wood was splintered and sun-bleached. I asked him about the night of the fire. His answers came easy, smooth, like lines he'd practiced in front of a mirror for decades. Leanne was troubled. Leanne was angry. Leanne had threatened people. Leanne stormed out. Minutes later, the fire started. It all fit too neatly. When I mentioned the back hallway, his fingers tightened around his coffee cup. "You seem to know a lot about this place," he said. Not curious, suspicious. That was when I knew this wasn't just a story anymore. Something here recognized me, and it wasn't happy to see me. I didn't sleep well that night. The motel room smelled faintly of cleaning solution and old carpet. The kind of place that tries too hard to convince you it's been scrubbed clean. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the heater and the occasional car passing on the road outside. Every time I closed my eyes, something pressed back. Not images yet, just sensations. Heat in my chest, a tightness in my throat, the uncomfortable certainty that if I fell asleep completely, I wouldn't wake up as myself. Sometime after midnight, the shift happened. I wasn't dreaming. I was standing. The hallway was narrow, exactly as I remembered it. Beige walls, scuffed baseboards, a faint smell of lemon cleaner mixed with something older, like dust baked into wood. The main room behind me was loud with teenage laughter and overlapping voices. Someone had music playing too loud. Someone else was arguing about snacks. I felt young, not physically small, but emotionally unfinished, like my thoughts were sharper, louder, more reactive. Someone whispered my name. Leanne. I turned. At the far end of the hallway, near the back door, stood a figure holding a red container. The plastic looked dull, scratched, like it had been used many times before. The smell hit me a second later. Gasoline. My mouth opened to scream, but the air stuck in my throat. Panic flooded my body so fast my legs barely moved. I tried to run. The door slammed. The sound was final, heavy, sealing. Then everything changed. Heat rushed in like a living thing. Smoke crawled down my throat, thick and oily. My lungs burned as I tried to breathe, each inhale feeling smaller than the last. The walls glowed orange. Someone pounded on a door. Someone else screamed my name again. This time, I knew it was the last time I would hear it. I woke up choking. I rolled off the bed and landed on the carpet, gasping like I'd been underwater too long. My chest hurt. My throat felt raw. My hands shook so badly I had to press them flat against the floor to steady myself. When my breathing finally slowed, I noticed something else. My neck hurt. Not sore, not stiff, dragged, like someone had pulled me backward by the collar. I sat there for a long time before I realized my recorder was still running on the nightstand. I hadn't turned it on. When I played it back, there was nothing but static and one faint sound underneath it. Breathing. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. I told myself I was just following procedure, that dreams, no matter how vivid, weren't evidence. But the tight focus in my chest told me this wasn't about journalism anymore. It was about correction. The clerk disappeared into the back and returned with a stack of files thick enough to make my arms ache. Fire reports, police statements, insurance claims, old newspaper clippings yellowed at the edges. I read everything. One detail kept resurfacing. A teenage boy named Evan had initially claimed he saw a tall man leaving the back of the church minutes before the fire fully erupted. He described broad shoulders, a dark coat, not a girl. 2 days later, he changed his statement. He said he must have imagined it, said the smoke confused him, said he was mistaken. I felt the same pressure in my chest I'd felt in the ruins. Someone had rewritten this story. I found Evan at a mechanic shop just outside town. Grease-stained hands, nervous eyes, the kind of man who learned early that staying quiet kept you safe. When I mentioned the fire, he froze. Then his voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't lie," he said. "I just got scared." He told me Pastor Eldridge had pulled him aside afterward, told him trauma could play tricks on the mind, told him repeating false memories would only hurt people. A hero's voice, a leader's authority. Evan folded. As he spoke, the air in the shop felt heavier, like the past had followed me inside. That night, the dream returned. Only this time, I wasn't standing in the hallway. I was dying. The flames climbed faster, the smoke pressed harder, the world narrowed to heat and pain, and the knowledge that help wasn't coming. Through the smoke, I saw him, Pastor Eldridge, standing outside a window, watching, not helping. I woke with tears on my face and ash under my fingernails. Real ash. That was the moment I stopped pretending this was imagination. Something had survived the fire, and it had waited 30 years for a voice strong enough to carry it back. By the 4th day in Dry Creek, I stopped pretending I was here for content. I wasn't filming much anymore. The camera stayed in the bag. My notes grew messier, less like research and more like a confession written in fragments. Names circled, dates underlined so hard the pen tore through the paper. I felt watched everywhere I went. Not followed, not stalked, observed. Like the town itself was paying attention, waiting to see what I would do with what it had buried. I spent hours inside the county archive room, the air stale and dry, my fingers coated with the fine dust of 30-year-old paper. I followed the money next, insurance payouts, repair estimates, donations that flooded in after the fire. Sympathy has a way of opening wallets, especially when tragedy wears a familiar face. Pastor Eldridge's name kept peering, not directly at first. Committees, boards, trusts, but the pattern was clear. The church burned, funds poured in, repairs stalled, paperwork vanished, and somehow Eldridge ended up in control of decisions no single man should have held alone. I tried to explain it away. People cut corners, paper trails decay, small towns operate on trust instead of oversight, but every rational explanation felt thin. That afternoon, I went back to the ruins. I didn't plan to confront him. I didn't plan anything. I just knew I needed to stand there again, in the place where everything seemed to come loose. The sky was overcast, heavy with low clouds that pressed down on the hill. The air smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. As I stepped inside the foundation, my chest tightened the same way it had before. I stood where the hallway used to be. The loose board creaked under my weight. Behind me, I heard a voice. "You shouldn't be here alone." I turned. Pastor Eldridge stood near the fence line, hands folded in front of him, posture relaxed, too relaxed, like he had been expecting me. I asked him why he came back here so often. He smiled gently and said grief doesn't have an expiration date. I asked him why Evan changed his statement. The smile didn't reach his eyes. He told me trauma makes people unreliable, that memories bend under pressure, that young minds are easy to confuse. Then I asked him something I hadn't planned to say. Why didn't you unlock the back door? The silence that followed was thick. For the first time since I met him, his calm fractured. Just a hairline crack. His jaw tightened. His breath paused before he answered. "That door was already jammed," he said. "Smoke does that." I didn't argue. I didn't accuse him. I just nodded. And in that moment, I understood something terrifying. He wasn't afraid of being caught. He was afraid of losing control of the story. That night, I didn't sleep at the motel. I sat on the edge of the bed with my recorder on, talking quietly into the darkness. Not narrating, not documenting, confessing. I talked about the heat, the hallway, the voice whispering Leanne's name, the man standing outside the window, watching. As I spoke, the room grew colder, the lamp flickered, and for the first time, I heard a voice that wasn't mine answer back. Not out loud, inside my chest. Not angry, not screaming, patient. I understood then that this wasn't about revenge. It was about being seen, about having the truth spoken by someone who could still breathe. The next morning, I found the photograph. It wasn't in a headline folder. It wasn't cataloged properly. It sat inside a thin envelope marked miscellaneous, shoved behind unrelated documents. A single photo, taken minutes after the fire. The back door, charred, twisted, and beside it, on the blackened ground, a pale rectangular outline where something had stood, something that had been removed. I stared at it until my vision blurred. That shape matched the size of a gas can. Someone had taken it before investigators arrived. Someone who knew exactly where to look. When I lifted my eyes from the photo, my reflection in the glass looked different. Older, tired, like I had finally accepted a role I didn't ask for, but couldn't refuse. That afternoon, I called Evan. I told him I was going to confront Pastor Eldridge again. He didn't hesitate. "I'll come," he said. "I'm done being quiet." The truth had waited long enough, and it wasn't going to wait much longer.
We met just before sunset. Evan arrived first, his truck pulling in beside mine at the edge of the hill. He looked smaller than he had in the mechanic shop, shoulders hunched, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. The old newspaper editor came a few minutes later. His hair was thinner now, his face lined with the kind of wear that comes from knowing you helped publish half a truth and living with it for decades. None of us said much. The ruins didn't invite conversation. The air had shifted again, thick and heavy,
like the moment before a storm breaks. Clouds hung low, swallowing the color from everything. The rebuilt church down the road rang its evening bell. The sound drifted up the hill and died before it reached us. Pastor Eldridge came last. He walked up the path like this was any other meeting, like he wasn't standing on top of the bones of a story he'd buried alive. His coat was buttoned, his posture straight, his face calm. "You wanted to talk," he said, eyes flicking between us. "About what?" I turned on my recorder. "About the fire," I said. "About what really happened." His gaze hardened just slightly, a warning disguised as patience. "There's nothing new to say," he replied. "Tragedy doesn't need to be rewritten every generation." I handed him the photograph. For a moment, he didn't look at it. Then his eyes dropped, and something in his face drained away. Not guilt, calculation breaking apart. "You shouldn't have that," he said quietly. That's when Evan spoke. "I saw you," he said. "I saw you come out the back." Pastor Eldridge turned to him slowly. The calm slipped further. "You were confused, Evan," he said. "You were a child." "You told me what to remember," Evan replied. "You told me what I saw couldn't be real." The editor stepped forward then, voice shaking. "We left details out. You asked us to. You said it would only cause panic."
For the first time, Pastor Eldridge raised his voice. "I was protecting this town." The words echoed wrong against the concrete. I felt the pressure in my chest again, stronger, hotter. My breath came shallow as memories pressed forward, no longer asking permission. I stepped closer. "You locked the back door," I said. "You poured the gas. You waited." He looked at me then, really looked, and his eyes widened. Not in fear of exposure, in recognition. "Leanne," he whispered. The sound of the name hit me like a blow. The world tilted. For a moment, I wasn't Riley Nash anymore. I was standing in that hallway again, lungs burning, knowing the door wouldn't open. I stayed upright. "I'm finishing your story," I said, "not rewriting it, finishing it." The wind picked up. The temperature dropped fast enough that our breath turned visible. The ruins creaked softly, like settling bones. Pastor Eldridge stepped back. "This is madness," he said. "You're sick, all of you." But his hands were shaking. I told him about the dreams, the hallway, the gas can, the moment he chose silence over lives. I told him things I hadn't written down anywhere, details only one person should have known. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I didn't think anyone remembered," he said. "I thought it burned with them." The ground beneath us felt suddenly unsteady. A sound rose from the ruins. Not a scream, not a voice. Breathing. Slow, labored, too many lungs moving at once. The editor stumbled back, pale. Evan grabbed his arm. I didn't run. I stood there and let it move through me. "You let us die," I said, "and you lived like it never happened." Pastor Eldridge fell to his knees. "I swear," he said, "I didn't think it would go that far." "It always goes that far," I replied. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called it in. Maybe Evan, maybe the editor, maybe the town finally heard what it had been avoiding for 30 years. As the lights crested the hill, the pressure in my chest eased. Not gone, just settled. The dead weren't screaming anymore. They were waiting.
The sirens didn't rush in the way I expected. They crept. Red and blue lights flickered against the low clouds, staining the ruins in color that didn't belong there. Sheriff's deputies stepped out carefully, like they could feel the weight of the place the moment their boots touched the ground. Pastor Eldridge was still on his knees when they reached him. He didn't resist. He didn't argue. He just stared at the broken foundation, like it was finally speaking back to him in a language he couldn't twist anymore. I turned off my recorder. For the first time since I arrived in Dry Creek, my hands were steady. They separated us, asked questions, took statements. The editor's voice shook as he explained what he had left out all those years ago. Evan's jaw clenched as he repeated what he'd seen, this time without flinching. When it was my turn, the sheriff looked at me longer than necessary. "How do you know all this, Mr. Nash?" he asked. I told him the truth he could accept. I said I studied the case. I said I followed inconsistencies. I said people eventually talk when the story cracks enough. He nodded, even though I could tell he didn't believe it was that simple. Neither did I. The next few days blurred together. News vans arrived. Reporters whispered into phones. Old residents came forward with half-memories they'd ignored for decades. A mechanic mentioned repairs done quietly. A former church volunteer admitted the back door had been locked that night. Insurance paperwork surfaced that had never been reviewed properly. The story unraveled faster than I expected. Pastor Eldridge was arrested and charged with arson, manslaughter, and insurance fraud. The word hero vanished from headlines. What replaced it was colder, calculated, deliberate. I stayed in Dry Creek long enough to give my statement to investigators. Then I packed my car and left before the town could decide what I was supposed to be to them. Savior, instigator, threat. Driving away, the pressure in my chest shifted again. Not pain this time, not grief. Release. That night, back in Denver, I slept without dreaming for the first time in weeks. No hallway, no heat, no smoke, just dark. In the quiet that followed, something inside me felt lighter. Not healed, not erased, just finished. People started reaching out after the story broke. Emails, messages, strangers telling me about dreams they couldn't explain, places that felt familiar before they should, memories that didn't belong to the life they were living now. I didn't have answers for them. I still don't. What I do know is this: some lives don't end cleanly. Some stories don't stop when the body does. And some truths need a living voice to carry them back into the light. Leanne didn't come back for revenge. She came back because someone had rewritten her ending. And now, finally, it had been corrected. I still visit churches sometimes, old buildings, burned ones, rebuilt ones, places where walls have listened to too much. Every now and then, a smell or a sound will make my chest tighten for half a second. But it passes, because the fire is over, and the girl who died in it no longer needs me to remember for her. People still ask me if I believe in reincarnation. They usually expect a yes or no, something neat, something they can hold on to. I never give them that. because what happened in Dry Creek didn't feel like rebirth in the way movies talk about it. There was no new beginning, no clean slate. What I felt was more like continuation, like a sentence that had been cut off mid-word and forced its way into another page. Leanne didn't come back to live again. She came back to be heard. After the trial, after the headlines faded and Pastor Eldridge became just another cautionary story people brought up when they talked about false leaders, something inside me settled into a quiet I hadn't known before. The dreams stopped completely. No fire, no hallway, no heat pressing against my chest. At first, that silence scared me more than the nightmares ever had. When something has lived inside you for that long, its absence feels like losing a limb. You keep expecting the pain to flare up even after it's gone. But weeks passed, then months, and nothing followed me. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how close I came to ignoring that comment, how easily Leanne's story could have stayed buried under 30 years of lies and polite silence, how many people walked past those ruins without ever feeling the weight of what happened there. I think about how many truths never get a second chance. I still make videos, I still investigate cold cases, but I'm more careful now, more aware of the way certain stories pull harder than others. When my chest tightens for no clear reason, when a name feels heavier than it should, I listen. Because some memories don't belong to one lifetime. They wait. They settle into the cracks between people, between moments, between lives, until someone finally stops and says, "I hear you." Leanne's story ended the night the truth came out. Not when the fire burned out, not when the case was closed, but when someone finally spoke her ending out loud. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the dead don't haunt places. They haunt unfinished stories. And sometimes, if you're unlucky or strong enough, they choose you to finish them. If this story stayed with you, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments what you think. Do you believe memories can survive death? Or do some truths simply refuse to disappear until someone is brave enough to face them? Either way, thank you for listening. And if you ever walk into a place you've never been, but your body reacts like it remembers, don't ignore it. It might not be your first time there.